Part 3 and the final video in the series on the Waainek Pass deals with the last 4 kilometers of the descent. Looking back at the history of Somerset East, in 1825 the project of Somerset Farm was cancelled as it was cheaper and easier to get provisions via contracts from farmers than it was to cultivate it. The English settlers in the Albany district welcomed the closure of the farm, as they were of the opinion that the farm practically had a monopoly on the market at the time. In the early 19th century, Somerset East was a major centre for the wool trade. The town was also home to a number of other industries, including tanning, wagon making and brick making. The town was also a popular stop for travellers on their way to and from the interior of South Africa. The town is now a major commercial centre for the Eastern Cape, and it is home for a number of industries, including agriculture, tourism and manufacturing. In March 2023, Somerset East was renamed Kwanojoli, which is the Xhosa name for the area. The name change was met with mixed reactions, with some people welcoming it as a way to acknowledge the town's African heritage, whilst others felt that it was unnecessary and disrespectful to the town's history. The entire area around Somerset East, known as Frontier Country, has many forts, of which Fort Cox is perhaps the most famous. Like many fortifications of that time, Fort Cox would seem to have been an earth redoubt reinforced with stone. It was built to accommodate 6 Royal Artillerymen, 1 company of regular infantry and 160 colonial coloured troops. The fort is located on a high peninsula formed by a loop of the Keiskamma River, about halfway between Fort Beaufort and King Williamstown. Some 15 kilometers further west is Alice, which in 1850 was a tiny village eclipsed in importance by the neighbouring Fort Hare. To the east, on the edge of the Amatola range and within easy sight of the fort, was the great place of Sandile, paramount chief of Harabi clan. Close by was the grave of Ndrika, father of Sandile and his half-brother Makoma. Of the many blunders that the arrogant and impulsive Cape Governor, Harry Smith, made during his disastrous 4 years as Cape Governor, underrating the traditional bonds of loyalty between the Amaxhosa clans and their chiefs, arguably had the most serious consequences. His humiliating treatment of the various chiefs fostered a deep smouldering anger amongst the subjected peoples, whom he was deluded enough to believe regarded him as their supreme chief. In the closing months of 1850, tensions were stretched to breaking point. The final straw was Smith's decision to depose and arrest Sandile as well as his brother Anta. This he announced in typical blustering fashion to a gather of some 3,000 in Ndrika and their chiefs near Fort Cox on the 19th of December. At the same time, he gave the assurance that the capture of the rebels would not be carried out by British troops, rather the Ndrika themselves would have to do so, thereby demonstrating their loyalty to the Crown and avoiding the fate of those who defied it. On the 24th of December, 16 years to the day since the mass Amaxhosa invasion that had launched the Sixth Frontier War, a 700-man column, headed by Lieutenant Colonel George McKinnon, left Fort Cox and set out for the Boma Pass. The intention was to intimidate Sandili by staging an elaborate show of force rather than realistically seeking to capture him. But whatever its aim, the demonstration proved to be one act of arrogant provocation too many. The Eighth Frontier War, destined to be the longest and by far the bloodiest of the frontier conflicts, commenced with a series of surprise attacks on various colonial strongpoints. Clearly, Sandila, Makoma and their followers had prepared their plans well in advance, while, for the Cape part, the forces were caught hopelessly unprepared. Smith had steadfastly disregarded warnings that war was imminent. Now, ensconced in his supposedly temporary Fort Cox headquarters, he began receiving a steady string of reports of the unfolding disaster. The first was that McKinnon's patrol had been ambushed and severely mauled in the Boma Pass, losing all its spare ammunition in the process. Next came the news that on Christmas Day the hamlets of Johannesburg, Woburn and Auckland had been overwhelmed, the adult male inhabitants of the latter two having been all but wiped out. Other outposts were also coming under attack. Nearly half of Fort White's small garrison, 15 men of the 45th Regiment, were waylaid and killed at Debbie Neck. Their mutilated bodies, neatly laid out on the road in a grisly tableau, being discovered by McKinnon's men during their circuitous retreat to Fort Knox.